Rolling. So this was my first acoustic guitar. It's kind of actually my first real guitar that I ever bought myself, all the way back in, I think, 2004. At the time I was 13 or 14 years old. I worked mowing lawns to save up the money to buy this guitar. It's a Taylor 110E. It holds a ton of sentimental value, and I'm really happy that I still have it. But things are very different now than they were 20 years ago. When it comes to buying a guitar today, there's way more options and different price points. So in today's video, I'm gonna share with you everything I wish I knew before I bought my first acoustic. And to help out with this, I'm bringing my friend Chris Alvarado from Driftwood Guitars. Chris has been building high-end acoustic guitars about as long as I've been playing guitar now, about 20 years. And he's learned a thing or two about what makes an acoustic guitar tick. Cool.
One of the biggest traps that a lot of people fall into, you just fall in love with a guitar because it just looks so rad. And a lot of the times that's because they've put this amazing piece of wood on the top of the guitar, also known as the soundboard. That can lead you down a trap of buying a guitar that looks really pretty but sounds really, really bad.
Which goes against what I tell people with an electric guitar. I always say, especially if it's your first one, buy what you like the look of and leave it out on the stand, because every time you walk by it, you're going to want to pick it up and play it. It's just a different thing.
The things that make a good piece of wood for a really high quality sounding soundboard on a guitar make it boring. So what you want is you want wood that is really lightweight and very straight grained, and those grains to be perfectly stacked next to each other, very parallel. And so when you see those like wild grained woods, like zebra wood, quilted and figured maples on the soundboards of guitars, they're hardwoods, and all of the characteristics that I just named that make a great soundboard, those are softwoods. So all of those hardwoods that people put on guitar tops, so counterproductive to making a good sounding guitar. And a lot of times, like for a more plain looking guitar, you could have one that sounds 20 times better.
What about body size and shape? How much does that matter?
It matters, I'd say, some. And some people are going to clutch their pearls and be like, what are you talking about? But I do find that the bulk of people that come to me that are looking at me building them a guitar, they have this idea that like, man, I want to get a Gibson J200, for example, jumbo, because I want this thing to be huge sounding. The reality of it is, like, yes, the shape does affect the sound of a guitar, but the bulk of what makes a guitar sound big is it being voiced correctly and paired, the top wood being paired well with the bottom woods, and then somebody voicing it in a way that brings out the most in all of those woods. So yeah, obviously a tiny little parlor guitar is always going to sound smaller and more petite, not have as much bottom end as a Dreadnought or a jumbo. I a lot of the times find that larger guitars sound smaller than J45, Dreadnought, kind of that to be the sweet spot as far as kind of having the best of both worlds.
Now there is one other aspect to the guitar's shape and size that is important to consider, and it's how you play the guitar. See, I'm a pretty heavy-handed strummer. Most of the time when I'm playing acoustic, I've got a pick in my hand and I'm just strumming away on big chords. And what that means is, for me, more often than not, a smaller body acoustic like this Eastman here, I tend to overpower. Smaller body guitars like this, or like a Martin OM or Triple O, for example, are gonna be more sensitive. They're gonna be better for fingerstyle or light picking duty, whereas things like Dreadnoughts, for example, bigger body guitars, are better for strumming. So it's something to think about when you're looking at a guitar. If you are more of a finger picker, fingerstyle guitarist, or light picker, then you might think about going with a smaller body guitar like this. Whereas if you're more of a heavy-handed player like myself, you probably want to look at something that's a little bit bigger, like a Dreadnought, for example, that's gonna stand up to your playing.
This is a big one. An electric guitar, if it doesn't play well, you're a YouTube video away from getting it dialed in. If you're not afraid of, like, you know, putting a screwdriver or an Allen key on it and kind of, you know, adjusting your intonation and adjusting your saddle height. And it's not like super high stakes, but an acoustic guitar, because of the way that it's built, where you have a glued on bridge and you have a bone saddle and you have a bone nut most of the time, like, you can't just adjust it. So if you are in the market for a used acoustic guitar, there's things that you need to consider that are different than if you're buying a new guitar. You know, if you're going out and you're buying a guitar from Sweetwater or whatever, you know, and it's not dialed in at all, you're going to be able to call your rep and get it sorted out. Something that happens to pretty much all acoustics is basically over time, if this is the neck and this is the body, that the pressure of the strings pulls that neck up ever so slightly, you know, fractions of a millimeter. But fractions of a millimeter all the way down at the nut end can cause those strings to rise up to a point at like the 12th and 14th fret that is unbearable to play. And that's a $500 to $1,000 fix. If you're shopping for a used instrument, you really need to make sure that you have somebody that you can trust that can look over it and make sure that it's dialed. Or at the very least, have the person who you're buying the guitar from, especially if it's on the internet, send you some photos of some really specific spots, especially like the string height at the 12th fret, a close-up of the bridge, close-up of the nut. Because it's an acoustic, the repairs for setups and for major structural things like that, they cost a lot more, so you just need to be aware of it.
So the repair that Chris is actually talking about there is what's called a neck reset, and this is something that needs to be done from time to time with certain acoustics if they haven't been stored properly over their lifetime, like this one. This is actually a 1980 Takamine lawsuit era guitar. These are made in Japan, and they're essentially clones, like exact clones of Martin guitars from the 70s and early 80s. I mean, you can see why Martin was not so happy with Takamine at the time. But this guitar actually needs a neck reset, and one of the ways that you can tell is how low the saddle is. If you look on the bridge of this guitar, the saddle is essentially flush with the rest of the bridge, which means that the only way to get the action low enough on this guitar to where it's remotely playable was to basically take the bridge all the way down. This guitar is only worth like $300, at least that's what I paid for it. So the cost of the neck reset would more than double the actual worth of the guitar. So if you want to see the video on how a neck reset works and possibly doing it to this guitar, let me know in the comment section down below. Speaking of Sweetwater, I want to quickly thank them for sponsoring today's video. Sweetwater is a great place to buy acoustic guitars online. They have a comprehensive inspection and setup process on most of the guitars that they sell, and they've got a great customer support team, so if there is a problem with the guitar that you buy from them, they're going to back it up. They carry all the major brands that you might be interested in checking out, and in the description box down below, I'll have a few links. Those will be affiliate links to some guitars that I think are good places to start if you're interested in getting into the acoustic guitar. Some beginner-friendly options, some budget-friendly options, and some things that just generally work really, really well. Those are affiliate links, so if you buy something through there, I earn a small commission, which helps me out in running this channel. And once again, thanks to Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. Now back to the interview with Chris.
What about maintenance, humidification, things like that? Because we're coming into the fall, which is going to lead into the winter. Things are cooling off. Things are getting drier. What do people need to know about keeping their acoustic guitars in good shape long term?
A piece of wood for a guitar, it can actually expand out in the width direction of the guitar when it gets over humidified, and it'll shrink in this direction when it gets dried out. That exerts a lot of pressure on the top of a guitar, especially in the dry direction. And a simple like 10% humidity reduction in a room, sometimes 40% humidity, and it drops down to 30, can cause giant cracks in the guitar. It's definitely something that you need to think about when buying your first acoustic, is whatever room that guitar is going to live in, if you do want to let it sit on a stand or on a guitar hook, is that you should have at least 1 or 2 hygrometers, and the hygrometers are those little thing that measures the amount of moisture that's in the air. If you can keep between 40 and 50% humidity in that room, you're going to be good to go. If you live anywhere where it dries out, it's best to keep it in its case in the middle of winter. If your heater's on, it should probably be in its case, or you're really going to risk cracking it.
Yeah, I didn't do this a couple of years ago on my Bourgeois, and a brace came loose because it, yeah.
You made a video about that,
I did.
Right?
Yeah, I
okay,
did.
Yeah. No, I had a customer I built a guitar for, it's this $20,000 guitar, and his truss rod popped inside the neck. I did a video on this. He popped inside the neck. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to do a truss rod replacement. He's like, no, and I do such a good job. I keep the humidity packets inside the case like full at all times. I'm always making sure they're full. He lives in the Southeast with me. And I was like, you say you did what now? He's like, it lives in its case, and I keep the humidity packets filled to the brim. I'm like, oh my God, you've over-humidified the guitar. I pull it out of the case and I measure, and the top is just completely bowed. And the nice thing is, I was able to actually pull the truss right out and put a new one in, but just let the guitar sit in a properly humidified house for a few days, and it was fixed up really nicely. So if you can catch humidity problems before they become damage, usually it just needs to be like set in a proper humidity room for a little while, and you're all fixed up.
So on your channel, you guys have done a lot of like taking these entry to mid-tier level acoustics and actually cutting them open. Are there specific brands that you guys see that maybe are taking a little extra care in the build quality and the things that are important? And what are some things as a guitar builder that you see in budget guitars that just really make your skin crawl?
Yeah, I'll answer the last question first, because it's like just bad craftsmanship. Braces not being glued on in exactly the right spot, and glue squeeze out, just glue dripping all over the insides of the guitar. And this is such a common problem in guitars. The back of the guitar, the part you can see through the sound hole on every manufacturer, always looks perfect, and it's because it's what you can see through the sound hole. But if you put a mirror in the side of a guitar, or if you cut it in half like we do, you just get to see like, oh, and it's not that like, oh, glue squeeze out's gonna make the guitar sound absolutely horrible. It just shows that like, oh, you just don't care. And that part really bothers me. And there are parts of the bad craftsmanship in some of these manufacturers, like where they glue a brace on either in not the right spot, or it's an incorrectly cut piece of wood, so the wood grain's running in the wrong direction, and you can just see it as a luthier that like, oh, that's gonna be cracked in 2 years. For me, the best at just the manufacturing process is Taylor. It just is. I personally am not crazy about the Taylor sound. I grew up as a Taylor fanboy, just obsessed. Whether it's a baby Taylor, you know, for $400, or it's their $9,000 presentation series, like the level of build quality is the same, and it's because they use a lot of CNC machines and automation. They mechanize almost every single step is well thought out and well planned. And with that, you end up with a sound that is the Taylor sound, and you either like it or you don't. But what you do get is really, really, really good craftsmanship that like holds up, and if you do have any issues, it's really easy to get repaired. Martin guitars, they do a really good job. They do really clean work. Those are really good. That's a big part of why we started doing that video series, because I just felt like there's certain manufacturers that were kind of like taking advantage of people because they knew that people were attracted to the name on the headstock. They were gonna make the sale anyway. Who cares if I build a good guitar? Like, it doesn't matter, because these people don't even know what a good guitar is, so why do I need to build a good one? And that just makes me so angry, because like, people deserve a good guitar.
Dude, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man. This is great.
So that's everything I wish I knew when I was buying my first acoustic guitar. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. If you did, let me know by leaving a comment down below. Also be sure to subscribe while you're down there, and check out the Driftwood Guitars channel. They have a whole series of amazing videos where they're actually cutting open a lot of budget to mid-tier acoustic guitars and showing you the guts and all of the flaws and the good things about them. It's a really fun series, really interesting. There's nobody else on YouTube that I know of that's doing that kind of stuff. So go subscribe to Driftwood. Subscribe here if you haven't done so already. Thanks to Chris for joining us again. My name is Rhett Shull. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you on the next one.